Okay, we've got time for some questions because we've got a bit of time for once today. So, any questions?
This is Zina Traus, Clevery Lectures. Can you tell me, do you keenly price your products in India when you sell your luxury goods? Are they in any way more keenly priced than you would otherwise?
You're going to have to define keen for me.
Well, it depends on how big your market is and how you perceive that you could saturate it with your good. And therefore you would price it in a more attractive fashion.
Generally speaking, and I can't speak for other brands, but luxury goods normally are more expensive the further you are away from the point of manufacture, for various reasons. I don't know what our pricing policy in India is, but I know that we won't discount in order to win market share. It's not the approach.
Is it cheaper here?
I couldn't comment on whether it's cheaper, but you can get tremendous value and a full experience if you purchase a French product in Paris. If I may say, it's a very complicated issue with the euro and with the pound and the yen. It's very complicated to make comparisons.
Okay, Narendra Chetty.
Hi, can I just ask Mihir, please, if I understood your talk correctly? Clearly, between India and Britain, there's been a lot of historical connection over the years. Do you foresee a greater constructive entanglement, or is it really a case, given our differences, of really East and West, but never the twain shall actually meet?
I can see a closer understanding coming, but I think to a certain extent, there hasn't been in this country, and history is important. George Santayana said, if you forget history, you're condemned to repeat it. That this country in some ways hasn't moved on in terms of maturity and reflecting, it once ruled India and things like that. So while that past has been forgotten, it hasn't moved on. India, in many ways, has moved on. And I'll give you one example of this. Not on this visit, the last visit he made, but the visit before that, Cameron went to Jallianwala Bagh. And Jallianwala Bagh, of course, we know is the site of the Amritsar massacre, where General Dyer ordered the shooting of people in that park. The shooting, incidentally, was done by Gurkhas. The order was 59 Gurkhas to the right shoot. So there were fellow Hindus shooting on other Hindus. But that was the great achievement of the British, that they could get Indians to fight other Indians. But that's a different story. The point is that what he said was, I'm not going to apologize, but he quoted what Churchill had said in the Parliament then, frightfulness. Now, it's very interesting. I was in India then. The British papers, in as much as they commented on it, some of them were appalled that he had gone there, because some of them thought what had happened then was still justified. There have been histories about that. A very famous historian of King's College has written a book, Andrew Roberts, who's a well-known historian, wrote that. Whereas in India, the press didn't particularly care whether he had gone or not, but they saw it as him trying to curry votes among the Indian diaspora here. Now, in that sense, the Indians have, looked at their past, and sometimes the Indians don't know much about their past, because the Indians' past is so complicated, You have these fantasists who believe that 2,000 years ago, in the Ramayana, they sent atom spacecraft, and had atom bombs and so on. But nevertheless, in that sense, the Indians have moved on. The British, because very few British actually knew anything about India, they need to know a bit more. The famous story, and this is a true story, Maynard Keynes set up the Reserve Bank of India, but never left the India office in London, because he didn't feel the need to. He took an Indian to bed because he was bisexual. Maybe he thought, having taken one Indian to bed, why do I have to meet 400 million Indians? That's a reasonable sort of conclusion to come to. But I think that is what is needed. And I think the problem is, in fact, for instance, Britain is not even the biggest European investor in India. It's Germany. Next to that is Belgium. So Britain, I think, needs to, I think to a certain extent, Britain relies on the fact, yes, we know India, when actually they don't know much about India. Things are changing. Ricky Stein goes to India, talks about, Indian food and all that sort of thing. Lots of changing. Indian cricket, is the biggest powerhouse. 80% of world cricket's income comes from India. Yet the Ashes will mean more to the British emotionally. So, there are what you might call emotional ties and other ties, and where India fits into that pattern is still to be resolved. Sorry, I've taken so long to answer, but it needs to be answered in that sense. Whereas with America, for instance, India doesn't have that history. It's more like two countries, the world's greatest democracy and the world's largest democracy meeting. So in that sense, and the British, for instance, it was very fascinating to see during the elections for Modi government. It was very, it wasn't much covered in this country. There was hardly any television coverage. There was a bit of paper coverage, newspaper coverage. But when the election results were announced, one would have expected it to make the 10 o'clock news, and it didn't make the 10 o'clock news, which is quite a surprise. If you think, if India means that much. I'm not sure that percolates right down yet. India's there, yes, we'd like to trade more and all that sort of thing, but, it's still, I would say it's in the developing stage.
Rakesh, just to say one quick thing is not an expert, but for a business that builds a lot of its success on brand and emotion, I wouldn't underestimate the importance of that emotional connection as much as an economic connection.
No, but there is another
connection makes a big difference.
Oh yes,
in the way
but there's another connection, which is, I think, to a certain extent, the one thing remains that when it comes to America, the Indians still feel that while Britain is no longer the supreme power, that the British are, when it comes to products, the British brand is somehow intellectually superior. This is an old story of V.S. Naipaul in the 60s when he met a Madras Brahmin reading O'Hara's book, and he said, no proper British writer would write such tosh, So there's still the feeling, the British Council is better than, the American USIS and that sort of thing, Oxbridge is probably still better than Harvard, but just about.
For me, a related question. In sport, why has India not excelled at anything other than cricket and kabaddi?
Well, actually, funnily enough, I went back to my old school in Bombay, and they've stopped playing kabaddi. So, so probably, the Koreans will go ahead of them in kabaddi. The Koreans, having learned hockey, beat the Indians regularly now. I think cricket, well, there are social factors there. Cricket was promoted by the Maharajas. So the upper class Indians took to cricket, and then business houses like the Ambanis, when India won the World Cup, realized they could be part of a brand and sponsored the World Cup and so on. The other sports mainly are very badly run. If you think FIFA is badly run, you should see how Indian football is run. And so therefore it hasn't caught on. And also I think there is if you like, an Indian and Asian family problem, when your mother is talking to another mother, she wants to say, my son the doctor, my son the engineer, my son the lawyer. Not yet does she want to say, my son the next Sachin Tendulkar, So maybe it will come. In fact, if you go to India now, it's very interesting. There's a recent ad running on Indian television where the son comes back from school with his cricket bat, and he's very upset. He says, next week I've got a big practice which will decide whether I'll be selected for the school team, and daddy is away. Who will give me some lesson? And the mother looks at it and says, is that a problem? She goes next door, practices a few strokes in front of the mirror, and teaches the son how to play the cover drive. That's of course is a television fictional thing, but never mind. Maybe it'll come, and that is one of the problems. The sport is badly run. And secondly, I think, it's not yet become important. An Indian said, sport in India is still khel kood, you just go to the Maidan and kick around. And I think there may also be, I certainly grew up under that, which is why I didn't become Sachin Tendulkar. There might be a feeling that, you can't play in the sun, it'll ruin your complexion. You won't get a good wife, and I didn't get a good wife. So, so that might be a factor as well.
A question for Ian. LVMH, there's 70 maisons there, many of them with French or European heritages over 100, 200 years plus. In the future, 5 years, 10 years, which do you think there'll be space for Indian or Chinese or other Asian luxury brands which come from those countries, have heritage from those countries? Can you see a day when they will be in the maison as well?
It's a tricky one. One of my colleagues at another conference was asked a similar question. He said, "I am sure." He said, "Just wait 200 years, and there will be one." Which is a little bit flip. I think we focused on what we call a Western perspective on luxury. There is no reason why you won't get high quality, luxurious products. Whether they would come into the fold of LVMH, I really can't say for sure. Our speciality is developing Western, or in some cases US, luxury brands. We do have a Chinese brand, Wenjung, which is a baiju, a luxury baiju. It's a growing market. We make progress with that. I wouldn't say never, but it's not the number one priority right now.
Other questions? Stuart Astle.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question whether your analysis is a little bit one of a southern conservative elite, British view of India, and possibly a little bit generational. So I grew up, in the north of England, and my experience.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. And my experience of what India means to me is the people that I was in the playground with, and their parents, because they were second generation. And my son's experience of what any future relationship with India will be is his friends in the playground that he plays cricket with, and even more, because we don't have Sky Television, that his primary consumption of cricket is the IPL, because that's the primary cricket that's broadcast on terrestrial television. So I think there's a generational and possibly sort of elite recognition and more common recognition of what this relationship with India is about. And for a lot of us, the fact that I feel I have a relationship with India is because people that had that background were all around me, rather than any privileged personal experience or view of it, and whether that's an important thing for the British relationship with India.
Mihir?
No, I don't think it's a southern elitist view. I mentioned Indian Summers, how it was promoted. And if you look at it, that shows, this is Channel 4 devoted a huge amount of money for a television series bringing India, of the Raj, admittedly, but bringing India to the popular screen. And, there was Julie Walters saying we need to remember India and all this sort of thing. The point I'm taking, yes, of course, IPL, but IPL is a fairly recent phenomenon. IPL is a phenomenon of the last few years. Sachin Tendulkar is a pretty recent phenomenon. And yes, people here realize that Indian cricket is important, but this Ashes series will mean more emotionally to the English than last summer's India series. Because, that is a historic series. The point I'm trying to make, and probably I didn't make it, is that Britain, because it had an empire which was so vast, had different relationship with different parts of the empire. The relationship it had with its white empire was necessarily different to the relationship it had with its non-white empires. So, for instance, Britain's relationship with India is different to its relationship with the West Indies. Because the West Indies is still dominion. The Queen can give a knighthood to Vivian Richards. The Queen couldn't give a knighthood to Sachin Tendulkar. He has other gongs from India. But, therefore, there's a difference. And yes, this is changing. But what the point I was trying to make is one needs to understand where we've come from in order not to develop myths which will take us forward. And if the relationship has to grow, hopefully in terms of equality. But, the past can't be made equal, but the past has to be understood to where we go to the future. It's that sort of thing. And, there will obviously, for instance, to give you an example, the Indians will, whether they are grateful for that, I do not know, but the Indians will always have a soft spot for the Welsh, because as you well know, the Indian accent is derived from the Welsh, you see, and as a friend of mine once told a story that he went to a conference in Coventry, a very good Welsh friend of mine, and at that conference, all the Indians, there were Indians there who'd come from India, after a time wouldn't talk to him. And he said, why are you not talking to me? He said, why are you putting on this accent to mock us? So, except I don't know how many Indians actually sing as well as Welsh, and they probably don't play rugby as well. But apart from that, these are factors. But I think we have to come to the stage. We are slowly coming to the stage where we can make these jokes and make these things without feeling chippy, you see. And that will take a bit of time. That it won't happen overnight. Yes, it will happen, but it won't happen overnight. Whereas, Tony Blair could go to US Congress, make a speech, and joke about the fact that the British had burned the White House. The British-India relationship is not in a state where David Cameron can make a joke about Jallianwala Bagh. It's not that, those are factors that one needs to take into account.
Daya.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a fascinating talk.
Can I have it in writing?
I can give you, I'll tweet it, but it was fantastic. I was particularly struck by your description of the diaspora in this country. And especially the last version, the people like you and me who are in professions but have Indian connections and come from a slightly different culture and class background. How do you see them playing a role in this East-West dialogue? Do you see, like in America, they've been very important in terms of their impact on policy, nuclear deal, for example. We haven't seen anything similar in UK.
Yes, we haven't.
Why?
Well, the flip answer is that, like all good Indians, they're making money, you see. They're far too busy making money to worry about wider things. I think what has happened, to a certain extent, this last election was very interesting. David Cameron made a big pitch for the well-off Indian vote, particularly the well-off Indian Hindu vote. It was a very, very big pitch that and the figures are not quite clear, but the figures are, historically, Indians used to vote for the Labour Party. And the Labour spread this myth, which is total rubbish, that, they were for Indian independence. I mean, yes, Attlee was the Prime Minister when it happened, but Labour had as little interest in India as the other parties. But I think what is happening there is, if you like, there are two things. In America, for instance, the diaspora is well organized, because it's very cohesive. Here, because of the divisions, many of that sort of brand of professionals, they are coming through. I mean, in a way, what Rakesh has done and all that, they are coming through, but they haven't got organized yet. They're, if you like, divided up into all sorts of aspects. And of course, in a way, the Asian community, not so much the Indian Asian community, but the other Asian community, the Bangladeshi and the Pakistanis, are going through a terrible crisis, which is also having a knock-on effect in the way they operate. For instance, if you look at the composition of the parliament, there aren't that many professional Indians of Indian origin there. And there has been a problem of what do you call them? Do you call them Asians? Do you call them Indians? Do you call them Pakistanis? There's a confusion of names here, and name does matter. Whereas in America, it's a very simple, the name tag is very simple. In America, Asian means East Asian, and there is what is called an East Indian group. So that is what the Indian is. So, I mean, I think it'll take some time, and I think the professional Indians need to organize themselves a bit better. I think some groups have, the Sikhs, for instance, have Sikh lawyers in the city and things like that. But how they can come together, they haven't quite worked that out, in my opinion.
Okay, final question from me. What can Bollywood achieve in India that politicians can't?
Well, you see, what Bollywood has done, and this is an interesting story, Bollywood has helped the making of modern India. When India got freedom, most people in this country, most people of, politicians and so on, thought India wouldn't survive. Pakistan was considered the great country, the virile Muslim country, which would be the barrier between communism and all that sort of stuff. And Pakistan was considered, bound to do well. India was, going to break up, all that sort of thing. People like Churchill thought the Hindus were a foul race and all that sort of thing. India's moved on, but India was integrated. If you go to India now, what is the language that many Indians use? It's Hinglish, which is a combination of Hindi and English. In fact, Hindi is now written in the Roman script. Now, why is that important? Back in the 30s, Subhash Bose, one of India's great sons and leaders, had seen how Ataturk had Romanized the Turkish script, and he proposed that. Well, that was considered rubbish, but yet that is happening. And of course, Bollywood now is so important that the other day, the Mail on Sunday ran a full-page article about an English girl who's become a great star in Bollywood, but she doesn't speak a word of Hindi or any Indian languages. And she said, "How is this English rose becoming a star in Bollywood?" Now, if you like, I mean, I've written a history of Bollywood and I'm going to revise it. And when I proposed it to my publisher, he said he was so excited. So in a way, like cricket, but even more than cricket, perhaps, Bollywood can spread the soft power of India. That's soft power, you know. India is never going to have an army or to have an empire, though there are some Hindu fantasists who believe there was an empire. In fact, I met one of them many years ago, and he told me that historians, people have forgotten that we had an empire that included England. And I said, how do you prove that? He said, why do you think the British changed their time at 12:30, at 12 o'clock at midnight? I said, why? I don't know. He said, 12 o'clock at midnight is 5:30 in the morning in India. And when the Hindus had an empire, the call would go out from the Ganges, change your time, and therefore the British changed their time at 12 o'clock. I'm sure many of you haven't thought that, but think about it and think about that Indian empire that people have forgotten. But but we're not going to get that. But Bollywood is going to, in that sense, and a lot of people now, when I first came to this country, Bollywood movies, it wasn't even called Bollywood, was shown on, Saturday mornings, in dang theatres. Now you have two musicals running, one on Bollywood, another one on, Bend It Like Beckham, which also has a lot of Bollywood tunes. So I think it can spread the message of India, and, to a certain extent, yoga has done that as well. So it's part of, if you like, the whole, what Bollywood can do for India is take India abroad and move it away from the image of the Maharajas, who probably still are around to use Ian's products and things like that, and create a new image of India, which is not about India wanting aid or India being poor or dirty and things like that. So I think its role is enormously important.
And Ian, the Bollywood babes as the brand ambassadors for the LVMH Maisons, no doubt?
We do have a number of Indian, I prefer to call them as Indian celebrities. If it's okay with you.
Have you got a list?
We do have it's important as we enter into markets that we're shown to be accepted locally. So it's Tag Heuer in particular has a number of people who wear their products.
I wear Tag as well. I like that.
Other excellent
Successes
watch brands
in mind
are available.
But do you take artistic inspiration from art and luxury?
A lot of the brands do. If you look at some of the very, very old products from Gyalan, they're inspired by India. From time to time, you will see the creative directors of the fashion houses take inspiration from different countries around the world. There's no reason why India wouldn't be an important part of that. It's a very important driver for Cartier. I mean, it's not one of our brands, just to know something about it.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard two fascinating presentations. Let's give both our speakers a fantastic round of applause. Thank you very much.